The collapse confronting Mark was a scene of quiet, brutal devastation. Eleanor did it in their father's study, with Sarah as a silent, tearful witness. She placed the composition notebook on the partner's desk, next to ledger volume Tweeth. She didn't need to say much. She just pointed to the final entry. Mark's face, usually a mask of confident arrogance, crumbled. He didn't deny it. He just sank into the chair opposite Eleanor, his shoulders slumping as the weight of 7 years of deceit finally broke him. "He came to me 7 years ago," Mark began, his voice a hollow monotone. "The 2008 crash. He'd made some bad leveraged bets. He was going to lose everything. So he started borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. It was supposed to be temporary. But the reputation, the returns, they became a monster. People threw money at him. To turn them away would have raised questions. So he took it. And the monster grew." He looked at his sisters, his eyes begging for an understanding he knew he didn't deserve. When he told me it was already $100 million hole, he was a coward. He couldn't face it. He asked me to help him, manage the distributions, keep the books looking right. He said we just needed time, one big win to plug the gap. "And you agreed?" Eleanor's voice was like ice. "What was I supposed to do, Ellie?" He shot back, a flicker of his old fire returning. "Go to the SEC? Destroy our family? Ruin Mom? Destroy every single person in this community? I thought I could fix it. I thought my deals, my connections, I could find a way to make real returns that matched the fake ones. But I couldn't. The numbers were too big. So I just kept the machine running. I became the ghost in the machine." He explained how he'd taken over the ledgers, mimicking their father's hand, creating the flawless trail of growth. He'd used his own knowledge of high finance to make the fictional investment sound plausible. He was the source of the complex structures he himself had been so sure existed. "The Cicero quote," Eleanor said. "That was Dad, a real confession." Mark nodded. "I think he knew the end was near. The pressure, it's what killed him, I'm sure of it. He couldn't live with it anymore." The three of them sat in the ruins of their father's legacy. The great Arthur Thatcher was not a financial titan. He was a fraud, and Mark was his accomplice. The moral dilemma was paralyzing. Do they go to Uncle David? To the SEC? Do they expose their own brother to federal prosecution? Do they willingly detonate the bomb that would destroy their entire family and social circle? The decision was made for them 2 days later. Diana Reed from the SEC called Eleanor. "Ms. Thatcher, we've expedited our inquiry based on some concerning patterns. We've subpoenaed the fund's bank records. There are no purchases of private equity or distressed debt. There is only one pattern. Incoming investor funds are almost immediately wired out to other investors as returns. It's a textbook Ponzi scheme. We're filing formal charges against the estate of Arthur Thatcher and the AT Heritage Group tomorrow morning. The news will break by noon." Eleanor listened, her hand gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles were white. She didn't mention Mark, not yet. She just thanked Agent Reed and hung up. She gathered the family, her mother, Mark, Sarah, and told them the news. Helen Thatcher broke down in heaving sobs, the sound of a life, an identity, shattering into a million pieces. Sarah held their mother, her own face a mask of stunned grief. Mark just stared out the window. "So that's it," he said softly. "It's over." The next day, the collapse was total and very public. The Denver Post business section headline was brutal. "Pillar of community or Ponzi schemer. SEC charges late Arthur Thatcher in massive fraud." The phone began to ring. And it didn't stop. It was Aunt Carol, hysterical, screaming that they had stolen from Tim, from a child with cancer. It was Frank Henderson, his voice trembling with a fury she had never heard, calling her father a thief. It was Robert Chen, leaving a terse, devastated message about his obliterated retirement. It was friends, cousins, colleagues. The fury was biblical. They had to disconnect the landline. Their personal cell phones blew up with texts and calls, some pleading, most venomous. Email inboxes flooded. A news van parked itself at the end of the cul-de-sac. The fortress was not just breached. It was burned to the ground, and the whole world was watching the flames. In the midst of the maelstrom, a certified letter arrived for Eleanor. It was from a law firm representing a group of over 50 investors. They were suing the Thatcher estate for restitution. The lawsuit named Eleanor as executor and in a devastating twist, Helen Thatcher, as the recipient of fraudulently obtained funds used to maintain her lifestyle. They were coming for her mother's house. The final, most crushing blow came that evening. Eleanor was in the kitchen, trying to force herself to eat something, when she heard a cry from the living room. She rushed in to find her mother on the floor, clutching her chest, struggling to breathe. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and terror. At the hospital, as doctors worked on Helen, a young woman approached Eleanor in the waiting room. She introduced herself as a reporter for a local TV station. "Ms. Thatcher, can you comment on the allegations that your family knew about the fraud for years?" Eleanor, sleep-deprived, heartsick, and terrified for her mother, simply stared. She saw the predatory gleam in the reporter's eye, the hunger for a soundbite of the grieving, guilty daughter. It was Sarah who stepped in, shoving the woman's microphone away. "Get out!" she screamed, her voice raw with a pain Eleanor had never heard. "Get out of here. My father is dead, my mother is in there, and you're chasing a story. Get out!" Security escorted the reporter out, but the violation was complete. There was no sanctuary, not even in a hospital. Hours later, the doctor emerged. Helen had suffered a severe stress-induced heart attack. She would survive, but she was fragile. Her world, the one Arthur had built for her, was gone, and the shock had very nearly killed her. Sitting in the harsh, fluorescent light of the hospital waiting room, surrounded by the wreckage of everything they had known, Eleanor looked at her siblings. Mark, hollowed out by guilt and shame. Sarah, vibrating with anger and grief. The financial dispute was over. They had lost. There was no money, only debt and liability. But the real battle, the human one, was just beginning. It was a battle for survival, for identity, for some way to piece together a life from the ashes of their father's beautiful, terrible lie. They were no longer the Thatchers of Cherry Hills Village. They were the family of the Ponzi schemer, and they would have to learn to live with the deafening silence that comes after the collapse. The Cracks, the memorial service, was a masterpiece of dignified grief. Hundreds of people filled the pews of the State Episcopal Church, friends, business associates, community leaders. The eulogies were lavish with praise, painting a portrait of a man who was not just successful but virtuous, a man of his word. Eleanor sat in the front pew between her stoic mother, Helen, and a fidgeting Sarah. She heard the words, but they echoed in the new hollow chamber of her fear. Integrity, prudence, a rock. She kept her back straight, a model of composure, but her mind was in the study, with that ledger and the cold eyes of the SEC agents. The reception at the house was a blur of black attire and murmured condolences. Eleanor moved through the crowd on autopilot, accepting hugs, squeezing hands. She saw Uncle David, her mother's brother, deep in conversation with Mark, his face grave. Good. They were on it. She was pouring a glass of water in the kitchen when her Aunt Carol, her father's younger sister, found her. "Ellie, honey?" Carol said, her eyes red-rimmed. "I'm so sorry. He was the best of us." She hesitated, twisting a napkin in her hands. "This is a terrible time, I know, but with the fund, everything is okay, isn't it? Only Bill and I were counting on a distribution this quarter for Tim's medical school tuition. It's just with the SEC showing up." Eleanor's heart plummeted. "The SEC? How did you—" Miriam Henderson saw them at the door. "It's all over the reception, Ellie. People are whispering." Of course they were. The fortress walls were transparent, after all. Eleanor forced a reassuring smile, the one she used for nervous clients. "Aunt Carol, there is nothing to worry about. It's a routine inquiry, a formality. Dad's records are impeccable. Tim's tuition is safe." She said the words with a conviction she did not feel. As Carol walked away, somewhat mollified, Eleanor leaned against the cool marble of the countertop, feeling sick. The money wasn't just numbers on a screen. It was college tuition, medical bills, retirement dreams. It was the woven financial fabric of their entire world. Later, after the last guest had left and the caterers had packed up, the family, Eleanor, Mark, Sarah, and their mother, Helen, gathered in the living room. The silence was heavy, broken only by the clink of ice in Mark's Scotch glass. Uncle David, a tall, imposing man with a lawyer's weary gaze, summarized the situation. "I've seen the freeze order. It's broad and it's a problem. I've filed a motion for an emergency hearing, But the wheels of justice, especially when the SEC is involved, grind slowly. We're looking at weeks, possibly months. Months? Helen whispered, her voice frail. But the bills, the household accounts, they're all tied to the fund. We'll set up a separate line of credit for you, Helen, David said gently. But that's the least of it. The real issue is the fund itself. Arthur was the general partner. He managed everything. The administrator, a firm downtown, just processed the paperwork he gave them. If the SEC can't find the assets are there, Mark insisted, pouring another finger of scotch. They're in private equity, distressed debt, off-market real estate, complex stuff. The SEC probably just doesn't understand the structure. Maybe, David said, his tone non-committal. Eleanor, as executor, you need to take formal control of all of Arthur's records. Everything in that study. We need to build our own case, find our own proof of the assets before the SEC tears the place apart looking for theirs. Eleanor nodded. I'll start tomorrow. I'll help, Mark said. I can read a balance sheet as well as anyone. No, Eleanor said a little too sharply. She softened her tone. I mean, let me do the initial sort. It's a mess in there. I'll systemize it, and then we can all go through it. It's what I do for a living, remember? Mark looked like he wanted to argue, but nodded reluctantly. The next morning, Eleanor returned to the study. She carried a box of empty file folders and a sense of grim determination. The sunlight streamed through the bay window, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. It felt like disturbing a tomb. She started with the filing cabinets. They were neatly organized, but the contents were, as she had suspected, largely administrative. Tax returns for the last 7 years, property deeds for the house and the cabin in Aspen, insurance policies, all legitimate, all above board. There were folders for the AT Heritage Group, but they contained only the polished, professionally printed quarterly reports that were sent to investors, the same reports that promised steady, unerring growth. There were no statements from custodial banks, no trade confirmations for the exotic assets Mark had described, no records of the private equity holdings. It was all output, no input, a stage set with no backstage. Her stomach tightened with each empty drawer. After 4 hours, she had found nothing of substance. She sat back in her father's chair, defeated. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe the real records were elsewhere, in a safety deposit box, with a lawyer she didn't know about. Her eyes fell on the green ledger, volume 28. She opened it again, this time with a forensic eye. She started from the beginning, cross-referencing the names and initial investments with the dates in the file cabinets. It all matched perfectly. It was a record of what people had put in and what they were told they had. Then she noticed something she had missed. The green ink. It was consistent for most of the book, but for the last 6 months, the color was slightly different. A darker, more emerald shade, and the penmanship, while a good imitation, was not her father's. It was tighter, more controlled. The shaky Cicero quote was in the original ink. The recent financial entries were in the new hand. Someone else had been writing in this book. A cold dread settled in her bones. She stood and went to the bookshelf where the other ledger volumes were lined up, 23 other identical green books. She pulled out volume 43. She flipped to the back. The same thing. The last several months of entries were in the different ink, the different hand. She pulled volume 28. Same. Volume 29. Same. It was a pattern. For years, someone else had been maintaining her father's most sacred text. Her phone buzzed. It was Sarah. Ellie, you need to come to my apartment, now. Sarah, I'm in the middle of, it's important. It's about Dad. The urgency in her sister's voice was undeniable. I'm on my way. Sarah lived in a bright bohemian loft in Denver's Rhino Art District. Canvases leaned against the walls and the air smelled of turpentine and coffee. When Eleanor arrived, Sarah was pacing, her face pale. What's going on? Eleanor asked. Sarah wordlessly handed her a small, faded composition notebook. The cover was stained with what looked like coffee. I was cleaning out the guest room closet, looking for a photo album Mom wanted, Sarah explained, her words tumbling out. It was at the bottom of a box of my old art supplies from college. I must have taken it by accident years ago. I thought it was a sketchbook. Eleanor opened it. The pages were filled with her father's handwriting, But this was different from the elegant script in the ledgers. This was hurried, anxious, written in blue ballpoint pen. It was a diary. She flipped to a random page, dated 15 years earlier. The Henderson investment came due today. A 12% return. The market is down 5%. I had to use the Miller principle to cover it. This is unsustainable. I am building a house of cards in a hurricane. But how do I stop? The trust is absolute. The faith is absolute. To fail them is to cease to exist. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She flipped to another page, 10 years ago. The Victory Pipeline deal does not exist. I created it to explain the returns to David, my own brother-in-law. God forgive me. The pressure from the new investors is immense. Everyone wants in. The only way to keep the old investors whole is to bring in new money. It's a mathematical certainty of collapse. She looked at Sarah, her horror reflected in her sister's eyes. Keep reading, Sarah whispered. Eleanor turned to the final entry, dated just over 7 years ago. The writing was frantic, desperate. It's over. I see no way out. The hole is too deep. I confessed everything to him today. I had no choice. He was furious, disgusted, but he is pragmatic. He understands that if this collapses, it takes everyone with it. The family, his own position, everything. He has agreed to help. He will manage the ledgers, maintain the illusion. He says he can stabilize it, find a way out. I have handed my sin to my only son. What have I done? The notebook slipped from Eleanor's numb fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. My only son. Mark. The pragmatic one. The numbers guy. The one who had been so adamant that the assets were real. The one who had volunteered to help with the records. He hadn't been trying to find the truth. He had been trying to bury it. The betrayal was so vast, so intimate, it was difficult to breathe. For 7 years, her father and her brother, a conspiracy of two, propping up the lie, using new money to pay off the old, living the grandest lie of all. The fortress wasn't just cracked. It had been built on a sinkhole from the very beginning, and Mark had been helping their father dig it deeper long after the foundation had given way. The house was a fortress of silence, built not of stone and mortar, but of money and memory. For 47 years, it had presided over a manicured cul-de-sac in Cherry Hills Village, just south of Denver, its red brick facade and white columns a testament to unshakable stability. To the Thatcher children, it had always been simply the house, a place of sprawling Christmases, summer barbecues that smelled of charcoal and cut grass, and the low, reassuring hum of their father's authority. Now, it was just quiet. Eleanor Thatcher, the eldest at 48, stood in the grand foyer, her heels sinking into the Persian rug her mother had chosen a lifetime ago. The air smelled of lemon polish, and the faint, cloying sweetness of the lilies already beginning to wilt in the massive arrangement on the console table. To her right, her brother, Mark, 45, scrolled through his phone, his brow furrowed. He was the pragmatist, a venture capitalist from Palo Alto, who spoke in deal sizes and exit strategies. To her left, Sarah, the baby at 39, stared out the window at the front garden, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The artist, the free spirit, the one who had always been content to live in their father's generous shadow. He always said the quiet would get loud one day, Sarah murmured, not turning from the window. Mark grunted without looking up. He said a lot of things, Sarah. Most of them were about asset allocation. Be kind, Mark, Eleanor said, her voice soft but firm. She was the executor, the peacemaker, the one who had stayed closest to home. A partner at a respected Denver law firm, she was the logical choice to manage the transition, the distribution, the closing of a life. It's only been a week since the massive coronary that had felled Arthur Thatcher on the 17th green of his country club. A week of obituaries that called him a pillar of the community, a shrewd investor, a devoted family man. A week of planning this final gathering. The doorbell chimed, its deep, resonant tone echoing through the cavernous house. Eleanor smoothed the front of her black dress and opened the door. It wasn't more family or a casserole-bearing neighbor. It was a man and a woman in sober, professional attire holding leather-bound folios. Eleanor Thatcher? The woman asked. She was in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes. I'm Diana Reed. This is my associate, Ben Carter. We're from the Securities and Exchange Commission. We're so sorry for your loss. We were hoping we could have a moment of your time. The quiet in the house didn't just get loud. It became a roaring in Eleanor's ears. The SEC on her father's doorstep. The day of his memorial. Mark was suddenly at her shoulder. The SEC? What is this about? It's a delicate matter, Mr. Thatcher, Ben Carter said, his voice calm. Regarding your father's investment fund, the AT Heritage Group. We'd prefer to speak inside. They were ushered into Arthur's study, a room that had always been off limits without an invitation. It was a temple to his success. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves held leather-bound classics and curated rows of financial reports. A massive partner's desk, cleared now of everything but a single old-fashioned green ledger book, dominated the center of the room. On the walls were black and white photographs of Arthur with governors, senators, and captains of industry. His gaze in every photo was the same, steady, confident, untouchable. Diana Reed got straight to the point. For the last several months, the Commission has been conducting a preliminary inquiry into the AT Heritage Group, following an anonymous tip. Our concern is one of liquidity. We have been unable to verify the underlying assets in several of the fund's core holdings. Mark let out a short, dismissive laugh. That's impossible. The Heritage Fund is a legend. It's returned 12%, like clockwork, for over 20 years. My own portfolio is heavily weighted in it. So are the portfolios of nearly everyone we know. That's precisely what concerns us, Mr. Thatcher, Reed said, her gaze unwavering. 12% annually without fail, through multiple recessions, market corrections, and global financial crises is statistically anomalous. We've requested certain documents from the fund's administrator, but the cooperation has been slow. We were hoping, as the executor of the estate, Ms. Thatcher, you could grant us access to your father's records. Eleanor felt the ground beneath her shift. Her father's fund was the bedrock of their lives. It had paid for her law degree, funded Mark's first startup, allowed Sarah to travel the world without a care. It was the trust fund for her own daughter, Chloe. It was the financial scripture their family lived by. My father was the most honest man I've ever known, Eleanor said, her voice tight. His reputation was everything. There must be a misunderstanding. We sincerely hope so, Carter said. But until we can audit the books, the fund's assets have been temporarily frozen by a court order. Frozen? Mark's voice rose an octave. You can't do that. I have capital calls due. It's a protective measure pending our investigation, Reed explained calmly. She placed a business card on the vast empty desk. Please, Ms. Thatcher, the sooner we can get clarity, the sooner we can resolve this. We'll see ourselves out. They left, the heavy front door clicking shut behind them, leaving the three siblings in the suffocating silence of the study. This is insane, Mark spat, pacing in front of the desk. A fucking anonymous tip? From a disgruntled employee? Dad probably fired someone, and this is their revenge. We need to call Mom's brother, David. He's the best corporate litigator in the state. We'll have this frozen order overturned by tomorrow. Mark, language, Eleanor said automatically, but her mind was racing. She looked at the single ledger on the desk. It was an antique, the kind with crisp, creamy paper and handwritten entries in green ink. Her father had always been fastidious about his ledger books. He'd called them the unvarnished truth. He was so proud of this fund, Sarah said, her voice small. She had wandered over to a bookshelf and was tracing the spine of a photo album. He called it his legacy, not the houses or the cars. This, the fact that he could provide for everyone. And he did, Mark insisted. This is a bureaucratic nightmare, but it's just a nightmare. It's not real. The money is real. The assets are real. Eleanor walked around the desk and sat in her father's worn leather chair. It still held the faint scent of his pipe tobacco, a smell that had always meant safety. She pulled the green ledger toward her. It was labeled simply, Volume D-Form. She opened it. The pages were filled with her father's elegant looping script in green ink. Dates, names, amounts. She recognized the names instantly. Aunt Carol, Uncle David, Frank and Miriam Henderson, their neighbors for 30 years, Robert Chen, her father's golf partner, millions of dollars in, and beside each entry, the steady, predictable growth. It was a ledger of trust, written in the hand of the most trusted man she knew. See? Mark said, coming to look over her shoulder. It's all there, meticulous as always. Eleanor flipped toward the back of the book, to the most recent entries. The last one was dated the day before he died. A new investment from the Petersons, their oldest friends. $2 million. And then she saw it. On the very last page, in a script that was shakier, less assured than the other entries, as if written by a tired hand, was a single line. It wasn't a financial entry. It was a quote, circled faintly. "No fortress is so strong that money cannot take it." Cicero. A cold finger traced a path down Eleanor's spine. It was a quote her father had often used, but always in the context of building wealth, of creating an unassailable financial fortress for his family. Why had he written it here now, like a secret confession? "What is it?" Sarah asked, sensing her sister's shift. "Nothing," Eleanor said, closing the book a little too quickly. "It's just his ledger." She looked at her siblings. "Mark's right. This is a misunderstanding. But we need to be smart. We'll get Uncle David on the phone after the service. For now, we have to get through today. We have to say goodbye to Dad." But as they left the study, Eleanor glanced back at the desk. The green ledger seemed to pulse with a dark, silent energy. The fortress, for the first time, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a prison,